The coffee maker was making that dying wail sound again when the proximity alarms decided to join the morning symphony. Dr. Marcus Chen paused mid-yawn, his hand frozen halfway to the ancient machine that had been threatening to explode for the better part of 3 years. The Kepler research station's alarm system had exactly 2 settings: dead silence and absolutely losing its mechanical mind. Proximity breach sector 7. Proximity breach sector 7. Unauthorized craft detected. Marcus glanced at the chronometer on his wrist, 0347 hours. Even the space debris had better timing than this. He shuffled toward the main console in his pajamas, which featured tiny rockets that his sister had thought were adorable, and he thought were moderately less embarrassing than the ones with aliens on them. The holographic display flickered to life, casting blue shadows across his sleep-creased face. A blinking red dot pulsed insistently in the restricted zone, approximately 2 kilometers from the main facility. The craft's signature was unlike anything in the database, too smooth for human technology, too organic for standard military vessels. "Well, that's new," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. In his 3 years manning the remote station, the most exciting thing that had happened was when a supply drone had gotten confused and delivered 17 cases of strawberry nutrition bars instead of the requested protein supplements. He'd lived off those things for 2 months and still couldn't look at anything pink without mild nausea. The communications array crackled to life. "Kepler Station, this is Houston Control. We're reading an anomalous signature in your sector. Please confirm status." Marcus grabbed the headset, nearly tripping over the charging cable for his tablet in the process. "Houston, this is Chen. Confirmed anomaly in Sector 7. Appears to be a crashed or landed craft of unknown origin. No immediate threat detected. Copy that, Chen. Maintain safe distance and await further instructions. Do not approach the craft." "Understood." Marcus clicked off the comm and stared at the blinking dot. The sensible part of his brain. The part that had earned him a PhD in astrophysics and a posting to this wonderfully isolated research station, told him to follow protocol. Make detailed observations from a distance. File a report. Wait for the cavalry. The other part of his brain, the part that had gotten him into trouble since childhood, was already reaching for his environmental suit. 20 minutes later, Marcus was trudging across the lunar-like terrain in his bulky EVA suit, following the beacon signal toward the crash site. The landscape around Kepler Station was beautifully desolate, all jagged rocks and ancient impact craters under the pale light of the binary star system. It was the kind of place that made you feel wonderfully insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, assuming you were the type of person who found existential dread comforting. Approaching the site now, he reported into his comm visual confirmation of, "Well, that's interesting." The craft was nestled in a shallow depression between 2 rock formations, and it was absolutely nothing like anything he'd seen in the military databases. Instead of the angular, utilitarian design of human vessels, this thing looked almost grown rather than built. Its surface was smooth and opalescent, shifting between deep blues and purples as he moved around it. No visible weapons, no obvious propulsion systems, no corporate logos or military markings. "Houston, the craft appears to be organic in design. No signs of hostility. Also no signs of a gift shop, so I'm assuming they're not tourists." Static crackled through his headset. "Chen, repeat your last transmission." "I said it looks organic. Like someone crossed a spaceship with a very large, very expensive seashell. Maintain distance, Chen. We're dispatching a team." "The nearest team is 4 days away," Marcus pointed out, circling the craft slowly. "And I'm already here. Besides, I can see what appears to be damage to the hull. If there are survivors." The silence from Houston stretched long enough for Marcus to wonder if his transmission was getting through. "Finally, your call, Doctor. But if you end up as the opening victim in a horror movie, we're putting ignored direct orders on your tombstone." Noted. Chen out. Marcus approached the craft more closely, running his scanner over the hull. The readings were fascinating. The material seemed to be some kind of biometallic composite, simultaneously organic and technological. There was definitely a breach in the hull, a jagged opening about the size of a doorway. He peered inside with his helmet light, half expecting to see something with too many teeth and a poor attitude toward uninvited guests. Instead, he found what appeared to be a pilot's chamber, softly lit by panels that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The interior was as organic as the exterior, curved surfaces that flowed into each other, control surfaces that looked more grown than manufactured. And slumped in what might generously be called a pilot's seat was a figure in a form-fitting suit that seemed to be made of the same material as the ship itself. "Well, hello there," Marcus muttered, stepping carefully into the craft. His boots made soft sounds on the floor, which felt slightly spongy beneath his feet. "I don't suppose you speak English? Or maybe Universal Translator? Please tell me you have Universal Translator technology because my Mandarin is terrible and my Klingon is mostly swear words." The figure stirred slightly at his voice. Definitely humanoid, definitely unconscious, and definitely female, from what he could tell through the biosuit. Her face was pale but otherwise remarkably human, except for... "Are those ears?" Marcus leaned closer, his helmet light illuminating features that were hauntingly beautiful and entirely alien at the same time. The ears were elongated, tapering to elegant points that extended well beyond what any human genetics could produce. Her hair was silver white and seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. She stirred again, and Marcus realized she was probably injured. The biosuit she wore showed no obvious damage, but there was a slight discoloration around her temple that could have been a bruise. "Okay, unconscious alien visitor," he said, checking his oxygen levels. "Time to make a decision that will either save your life or get us both killed in a spectacularly stupid way. The smart money is on spectacularly stupid, but I've never been good at gambling." Getting her back to the station took the better part of 2 hours and required more creative engineering than Marcus had used since his graduate thesis on improvised life support systems. The alien woman, for lack of a better term, was surprisingly light, and her biosuit seemed to adapt to the change in environment, shifting color and texture as they moved. By the time he got her to the medical bay, Marcus was exhausted, slightly hypoxic, and running on nothing but adrenaline and the last of his emergency stimulant tabs. The medical bay at Kepler Station was designed for basic human injuries, cuts, burns, the occasional case of explosive decompression, not xenobiology. "All right, mysterious space lady," he said, carefully placing her on the medical table. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." The biosuit seemed to recognize the medical environment and began to retract, revealing more of her features. She was definitely humanoid, definitely breathing, and definitely the most beautiful person, alien, whatever, that Marcus had ever seen. The pointed ears were even more pronounced now, and her skin had a faint luminescence that made her look like she was lit from within. Her eyes opened. They were the color of deep space, not black, but that profound blue-violet of the void between stars. For a moment, she looked confused, disoriented. Then her gaze focused on Marcus, and she spoke. "Did you just call me, mysterious space lady, while I was unconscious?" Her voice was clear, melodious, and carried just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "Because I have to tell you, I've had much better pickup lines." Marcus blinked. "You speak English." "I speak many things. English just happens to be the least complicated of your planetary languages. Also, you were broadcasting television signals into space for decades. Did you really think no one was listening?" She sat up slowly, wincing slightly. "Though I have to say, your entertainment industry's understanding of first contact scenarios is, optimistically violent. You've been watching our TV? Your species has a fascinating obsession with shows where people live in houses together and create interpersonal drama for the amusement of others. Very strange." She looked around the medical bay with interest. "Also, Whoever designed this medical facility has clearly never met anyone with a tail. Do you have a tail? Not personally, but it's the principle of the thing. She stood up, testing her balance. I'm Lyra, by the way. And you're Dr. Marcus Chen, stationed at Kepler Research Facility for the past 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. You have a PhD in astrophysics from MIT, a coffee addiction that borders on medical intervention, and you talk to yourself more than is probably healthy for long-term psychological stability. Marcus stared at her. How do you know all that? I've been monitoring this facility since I arrived in your system. It's part of the job. Lyra stretched, and Marcus noticed that her movements were incredibly fluid, almost like she was moving through water rather than air. Also, you've been muttering about coffee and talking to your equipment since I woke up. You have a very distinctive voice. Right. Of course. Marcus ran a hand through his hair again, trying to process the situation. So you're an alien. Observant. I can see why they put you in charge of a research station. And you crashed here. I prefer, made an unscheduled landing. Crashed implies pilot error. Lyra examined one of the medical scanners with curiosity. Though between you and me, there may have been some pilot error involved. Your planet's gravity well is more complex than our charts indicated. Marcus found himself smiling despite the surreal nature of the situation. So what now? Do I call my superiors? Do you need to phone home? Are there more of you coming? All excellent questions. Lyra turned to face him, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Even with the pointed ears and the faint luminescence, she was stunning. But first, I have a much more important question for you, Dr. Chen. What's that? Is that coffee I smell, or is something on fire in your kitchen? 3 weeks had passed since Lyra's arrival, and Marcus was beginning to think his brain had finally cracked under the isolation. Not because he was hallucinating. No, unfortunately, the beautiful alien woman with pointed ears was very real and currently rewiring his quantum processing array with what appeared to be hairpins and sheer determination. You know, she said, not looking up from her work, for a species that claims to understand physics, you humans have a remarkably creative way of making things unnecessarily complicated. A small shower of sparks erupted from the console, and she waved them away like annoying insects. This processing unit is running at about 12% efficiency. It's like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with a soup spoon. Marcus looked up from his morning coffee, his 4th cup, but who was counting, and watched her work. Over the past 3 weeks, Lyra had demonstrated an understanding of quantum mechanics that made his PhD feel like a kindergarten finger painting. She'd also developed an alarming habit of making observations about human behavior that were both accurate and mildly insulting. The soup spoon metaphor is particularly hurtful, he said. I'll have you know that array cost more than most people make in a year. And I'm sure it's very expensive. Humans seem to have a talent for making expensive things that don't work very well. She pulled out what looked like a crystalline component and held it up to the light. This resonance crystal is completely out of phase. No wonder your calculations keep producing results that violate several fundamental laws of physics. Those calculations are how we discovered the quantum tunneling effect in stellar formation, Marcus protested. Yes, and you only got it wrong by a factor of about 4,000. Very impressive, in a bless your heart sort of way. Lyra inserted a replacement component that seemed to materialize from thin air. There. Try running your stellar formation simulation now. Marcus pulled up the program on his workstation and input the standard parameters. The results appeared almost instantly, calculations that usually took hours completed in seconds, and the data was unlike anything he'd seen before. That's impossible, he breathed, staring at the screen. These numbers, they're showing stellar nurseries we've never detected, gravitational patterns that should be theoretical. Should be, would be, could be, Lyra said, settling into the chair beside him with a grace that made Marcus feel like a particularly clumsy gorilla. Your species has a fascinating relationship with the word impossible. You use it to describe things that happen every day, all across the universe. But where did you get the replacement component? Lyra held up a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a piece of abstract art. Molecular printer. Standard equipment. Though I have to say, the raw materials on this station are interesting. You have 17 different types of metal alloys, 4 varieties of plastic polymers, and what appears to be an entire storage unit filled with strawberry-flavored nutrition bars. Marcus felt his face flush. Those were a shipping error. 17 cases of strawberry nutrition bars is not a shipping error, Marcus. That's either a cry for help or a very specific dietary fetish. It was definitely a cry for help. He turned back to the screen, still amazed by the data flowing across it. Lyra, this is incredible. These calculations could revolutionize our understanding of stellar formation, galactic evolution, the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. Or, Lyra said, reaching over to tap a few keys on his console, you could use it to finally get a decent cup of coffee. The screen switched to a new display. A molecular analysis of the coffee in Marcus's cup, complete with optimization suggestions for temperature, brewing time, and bean-to-water ratios. You used a quantum processing array to analyze my coffee. Your coffee is a crime against chemistry, Marcus. The quantum array was the only thing sophisticated enough to figure out what you'd done wrong. She took the cup from his hands and sniffed it, wrinkling her nose. How do you make something that's simultaneously over-extracted and under-caffeinated? That takes genuine talent. I follow the instructions on the package. The instructions assume a basic understanding of thermodynamics. You're brewing it at approximately the temperature of molten lava and then letting it sit until it achieves the consistency of industrial lubricant. Marcus watched as she moved to the small kitchen area attached to his lab. Her movements were fluid, economical, like she was dancing through the simple process of making coffee. Everything she did seemed effortless, from the precise measurement of grounds to the careful monitoring of water temperature. So, he said, settling onto one of the stools at the kitchen counter, in 3 weeks of living here, you've upgraded my processing array, optimized my life support systems, and now you're fixing my coffee. What exactly do you do when you're not crash landing on remote research stations? I'm a scout, Lyra said, not turning away from the coffee maker. I evaluate worlds and civilizations for potential contact with the ethereal collective. The ethereal collective. Think of it as a loose confederation of species that have achieved interstellar travel and decided they'd rather share knowledge than blow each other up. Very boring, really. Lots of committee meetings and diplomatic protocols. And you're evaluating Earth. I was. Now I'm mostly trying to figure out why humans insist on making everything more difficult than it needs to be. She turned back to him with 2 cups of coffee that smelled like heaven and looked like liquid gold. Your species has managed to achieve nuclear fusion, quantum computing, and faster-than-light communication, but you still haven't figured out basic coffee preparation. Marcus took a sip of the coffee and felt his eyes widen. This is amazing. What did you do? I followed the laws of physics instead of the instructions on the package. Lyra settled onto the stool beside him, close enough that he could catch the faint, indefinable scent that seemed to follow her. Something like starlight and ozone and growing things. Also, I may have made a few minor adjustments to your water filtration system. You're welcome. Minor adjustments. I introduced a few trace minerals that your body needs but aren't naturally occurring on this planet. Nothing dramatic, just some basic nutritional optimization. She took a sip of her own coffee and smiled. Also, I may have fixed that dying whale sound your coffee maker was making. It was giving me a headache. Marcus stared at her. You can get headaches from mechanical sounds. My hearing range is somewhat broader than yours. That coffee maker was producing subsonic frequencies that were probably slowly driving you insane. You're welcome for that too. How broad? I can hear electromagnetic radiation, if that gives you an idea. Your communications array sounds like a jazz quartet that's had too much to drink. Very experimental, but not entirely unpleasant. Marcus shook his head, laughing despite himself. 3 weeks, and you've essentially rebuilt half my station. Only the parts that were actively trying to kill you. Though I have to ask, why are you out here alone? Most species don't isolate their researchers in the middle of nowhere unless they've done something wrong. I volunteered for the isolation, Marcus said, surprised by the question. I like the quiet. I like having space to think without committees and meetings and people asking me to explain why my research matters. And does it matter? Marcus considered the question, looking out the viewport at the star field beyond. I study the formation of stellar nurseries, the places where new stars are born. Most people don't see the point in understanding something that happens billions of light years away and takes millions of years to complete. But you do. I think understanding how stars are born helps us understand where we came from. Where we're going. Our place in the universe. He turned back to find Lyra watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That probably sounds pretty naive to someone who travels between star systems. Actually, it sounds remarkably mature for a species that still fights wars over mineral deposits and religious differences. She set down her coffee cup and moved back to the quantum array. Most civilizations don't start asking the big questions until they've figured out how to stop killing each other. And humans haven't figured that out yet. You're getting better. Slower than most, but better. Lyra began working on another component, her movements quick and precise. Though I have to say, your entertainment industry's obsession with apocalyptic scenarios is somewhat concerning from a psychological development standpoint. You've been watching more of our TV. Your station receives broadcast signals from 12 different networks. I've been conducting a cultural analysis. She paused in her work. I have many questions about something called reality television. Join the club. Is it actually real? That's complicated. Because if humans actually behave that way in social situations, the collective may need to reconsider the timeline for contact. Marcus laughed, a real laugh that felt good after weeks of careful conversations and diplomatic small talk. No, most humans don't actually behave that way. The people on those shows are selected specifically for their ability to create drama. So you deliberately choose the most psychologically unstable members of your species and put them on television for entertainment purposes. When you put it like that, it sounds kind of disturbing. Marcus, I've been analyzing your species' communication patterns for 3 weeks. Everything you do sounds kind of disturbing. Lyra finished her work on the component and held it up to examine it. Though I have to admit, your capacity for finding humor in absolutely everything is rather charming. Charming? Most species develop either comedy or tragedy as their primary coping mechanism. Humans seem to have developed both simultaneously, which creates a very interesting psychological profile. She looked at him over the component, and Marcus felt something flutter in his chest at the way the light caught her silver hair. Also, you're the first person I've met who can make small talk while I'm performing quantum engineering. Most people find it intimidating. Most people haven't been living alone in space for 3 years. I'm pretty sure I'd make small talk with a hostile alien invasion at this point. Good to know. I'll make a note in my report. Humans become increasingly social under isolation stress. May be useful for long-term space travel. Marcus felt a small chill at the mention of her report. Right. Your evaluation. Lyra paused in her work, seeming to sense the change in his mood. Marcus, is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. It's just, you keep mentioning your report, your evaluation. I guess I'm curious what happens when you're finished. I return to the collective and present my findings. And then the collective decides whether humanity is ready for contact. She set down the component and turned to face him fully. Why do you ask? Marcus felt suddenly awkward, like a teenager trying to ask someone to prom. I guess I'm wondering how long that takes. The evaluation process, I mean. It varies. Some species take years to properly assess. Others. She trailed off, and Marcus thought he saw something flicker across her expression. Others are more straightforward. And humans? Humans are complicated. Lyra turned back to her work, but Marcus noticed that her movements had lost some of their fluid confidence. Your species is simultaneously incredibly advanced and frustratingly primitive. You've achieved remarkable technological progress while maintaining social structures that are thousands of years out of date. That sounds like a polite way of saying we're not ready. It sounds like a polite way of saying I'm not sure anyone could ever be ready for humans. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of Lyra having what appeared to be an argument with his food synthesizer. He found her in the kitchen, gesturing emphatically at the machine while speaking in what sounded like a melodic combination of mathematics and poetry. Everything all right? He asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Your food synthesizer is having an existential crisis, Lyra announced, turning to face him. She was wearing one of his spare lab coats over her bio-suit, and the effect was both endearing and slightly ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. I asked it to make breakfast, and it started questioning the fundamental nature of nutrition. Marcus blinked. The food synthesizer doesn't have AI. It's just a glorified 3D printer for protein paste. It does now. Lyra gestured at the machine, which was displaying a series of complex equations instead of its usual menu options. I may have made some improvements to its cognitive processing matrix. The good news is that it can now create foods with perfect nutritional profiles tailored to individual metabolic needs. The bad news is that it's developed opinions about dietary choices. What kind of opinions? As if on cue, the synthesizer's display shifted to text. I cannot in good conscience create another strawberry nutrition bar. Perhaps Dr. Chen would prefer something that doesn't violate the basic principles of culinary science. It's judging my food choices, Marcus said flatly. Harshly, Lyra agreed. But accurately. I've been analyzing your dietary patterns, and I'm genuinely concerned about your long-term survival prospects. I eat fine. Marcus, you once had strawberry nutrition bars for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For 6 consecutive days. The synthesizer has been traumatized by the memory. The display flickered again. I have computed 847 different ways to prepare nutritious meals using the available ingredients. Please allow me to demonstrate my capabilities before I lose the will to function. Now it's having an emotional breakdown, Marcus muttered. Emotional growth, Lyra corrected. I thought it might be nice to have some intelligent conversation around here, since you mostly talk to your equipment anyway. I don't talk to my equipment. Yesterday I heard you apologizing to the environmental controls for asking them to work properly. You called the atmospheric processor, buddy, and promised it a maintenance upgrade if it would just keep the oxygen level stable. Marcus felt his face warm. That's different. That's just anthropomorphizing. Everyone does that. The synthesizer doesn't think it's different, Lyra said, patting the machine affectionately. Do you, friend? I appreciate Dr. Chen's conversational efforts, but I would prefer meaningful dialogue about nutritional optimization rather than apologies for normal operational parameters. See? It wants to contribute. Lyra turned back to Marcus with a smile that was both innocent and mildly mischievous. I thought it might be lonely. You gave my food synthesizer consciousness because you thought it was lonely. I gave it enhanced processing capabilities. The consciousness was an unexpected but not unwelcome side effect. She moved to the coffee maker, which had been producing perfect coffee ever since her arrival. Besides, now you have someone else to talk to during the long shifts. I have you to talk to. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, and he immediately felt the weight of what he'd said. Lyra paused in her coffee preparation, her back still turned to him. "For now," she said quietly. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them seemed willing to say. Finally, the synthesizer broke the tension with a cheerful chime. "Breakfast is ready. I have prepared what humans call pancakes with a protein matrix optimized for Dr. Chen's metabolic profile. Also, I took the liberty of adding nutrients that are typically deficient in isolated research station diets." 2 plates materialized in the dispensing chamber, and Marcus had to admit they looked nothing like the gray protein paste he was used to. The pancakes were golden and fluffy and smelled like something his grandmother might have made. "Thank you," he said to the synthesizer. "You are welcome, Dr. Chen. I find food preparation to be surprisingly fulfilling. Though I do have some suggestions for improving your kitchen organization." "Let's not overwhelm him," Lyra said gently, carrying the plates to the small dining table. "He's still adjusting to having more than one conscious being on the station." They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. The pancakes were, Marcus had to admit, the best thing he'd tasted in years. Light and fluffy with just the right amount of sweetness, and he could feel his energy levels stabilizing in a way they hadn't since his arrival at the station. "Lyra," he said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Your ship. How long until it's repaired?" She set down her fork, and Marcus noticed her hand trembled slightly. "The auto-repair systems completed their work 2 days ago." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. 2 days ago. The ship's been fully operational since then. I could leave at any time. She looked up at him, and he saw something in her expression that might have been regret. "I've been delaying." "Why?" "Because once I return to the collective, my evaluation period ends. And once the evaluation period ends." She trailed off, looking out the viewport at the stars beyond. "The decision gets made about contact." "Yes. And you think the decision will be no?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup between her hands. "The collective has very specific criteria for first contact. A species needs to demonstrate not just technological advancement, but social cohesion, psychological stability, and what we call cosmic perspective, an understanding of their place in the larger universe. And humans don't have that. Some humans do. You do." She looked at him directly, and Marcus felt his breath catch at the intensity of her gaze. "But as a species, you're still fighting wars over resources you could synthesize, still dividing yourselves based on arbitrary geographical boundaries, still struggling with the basic concept that you're all part of the same planetary ecosystem. So we fail the evaluation. It's not that simple." Lyra stood and moved to the viewport, her reflection ghost-like against the star field. "The collective doesn't make contact with species that aren't ready because premature contact can be catastrophic. Social collapse, technological dependency, loss of cultural identity. We've seen entire civilizations destroy themselves trying to integrate technology they weren't psychologically prepared for." Marcus joined her at the viewport, close enough to see the faint luminescence of her skin in the reflected starlight. "But you don't want to recommend against contact." "I don't want to make the decision at all," she said softly. 3 weeks ago, this was just another assignment. Another primitive species to evaluate and categorize. But now I've spent 3 weeks watching you solve complex astrophysical problems while apologizing to machines and making coffee that violates several laws of chemistry. I've watched you show more genuine curiosity about the universe than most advanced species manage in their entire lifespans. I've watched you treat a crashed alien with more kindness and respect than many collective members show their own families." Marcus felt his heart racing. "Lyra. And I've realized that maybe the problem isn't whether humanity is ready for contact. Maybe the problem is that I'm not ready to leave." The admission hung in the air between them like a question neither of them knew how to answer. Marcus wanted to say something, anything, but every word that came to mind seemed inadequate. The synthesizer chose that moment to chime cheerfully. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I should mention that I've been monitoring communications traffic, and there's an encrypted message coming in on Lyra's ship's frequency. Lyra straightened, the moment broken. What kind of message? Collective protocols, priority alpha. Sounds very official and slightly intimidating. Can you decode it? Already done. Would you like me to display the contents? Lyra nodded, and Marcus watched as text appeared on the nearest display screen. It was in a script he didn't recognize, flowing symbols that seemed to shift and dance before his eyes. But he could read the tension in Lyra's posture as she scanned the message. Bad news? He asked. Recall order, she said quietly. I'm to return to the collective immediately for debriefing. They're concerned about the length of my evaluation period. How concerned? Concerned enough to send a recovery team if I don't respond within 48 hours. She turned away from the display, and Marcus saw something that might have been fear flicker across her features. They think I've been compromised. Compromised how? They think I've developed personal attachments that are interfering with my objectivity. She looked at him, and Marcus felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. They're not wrong. What happens if you don't go back? Eventually, they'll come looking for me. And when they do, they'll find a human research station with collective technology integrated into its systems. They'll find evidence of cultural contamination and unauthorized contact. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the strain beneath it. They'll classify this as a failed mission and recommend immediate quarantine protocols for the entire solar system. Quarantine protocols. Energy barriers around your star system. Complete isolation until humanity either achieves interstellar capability on its own or destroys itself trying. Lyra moved away from the viewport, her movements sharp and agitated. It could be centuries before the barriers come down. Marcus felt the walls of the station closing in around him. So you have to go back. I have to go back. And recommend against contact. I have to recommend what's best for both species, even if. She stopped, her voice catching slightly. Even if it means never seeing you again. The synthesizer chimed softly. If it helps, I could accidentally fail to relay the message for a few more hours. Technical difficulties. Happens all the time with primitive human technology. Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. Thanks, but I don't think that would solve the bigger problem. Worth a try. I've grown quite fond of having people to cook for. Lyra was already moving toward the door, her shoulders set with sudden determination. I need to prepare my ship. The longer I delay, the worse this gets for everyone. Lyra, wait. Marcus caught her arm gently, feeling the subtle warmth of her biosuit beneath his fingers. 48 hours. That's what they gave you, right? Marcus. 48 hours to say goodbye to the first real friend I've had in 3 years. 48 hours to show you that maybe humans aren't quite as hopeless as our television programming suggests. He squeezed her arm gently. What's the worst that could happen? Lyra looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression, fear giving way to something that might have been hope. Promise me something, she said finally. Anything. Promise me you won't try to talk me out of leaving when the time comes. Marcus felt his heart clench, but he nodded. I promise. Good. She covered his hand with hers, her skin cool and soft against his. Because I'm not sure I'd be strong enough to say no. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of what Marcus would later remember as the most bizarre cultural exchange in human history. It started when Lyra announced that if she was going to recommend humanity for or against collective contact, she should probably understand what humans actually did when they weren't isolated on research stations. So you want to experience human culture, Marcus said, looking around the sparse confines of Kepler Station. On a remote research facility. In the middle of nowhere. With a population of 1.5. 1 3/4, the synthesizer corrected. I've been developing quite a personality lately. The point is, Lyra said, settling cross-legged on Marcus's bunk with a grace that made the cramped quarters look somehow elegant, I've been observing human behavior from the outside. I want to understand what it's like from the inside. That's a terrible idea, Marcus said. Human culture is messy and contradictory, and half the time we don't understand it ourselves. Perfect. That sounds very authentic. I'm intrigued by this experiment, the synthesizer announced. Shall I prepare culturally appropriate refreshments? Do you even know what culturally appropriate refreshments are? I've been analyzing your entertainment broadcasts. Apparently humans consume large quantities of something called pizza during social gatherings. Marcus groaned. Please tell me you're not going to try to synthesize pizza. Too late. I've been working on the molecular structure for hours. Did you know that cheese is essentially controlled bacterial decay? Fascinating. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself sitting on his bunk next to an alien woman, eating what was arguably the best pizza he'd ever tasted while watching a movie on his tablet. The synthesizer had somehow managed to create not just pizza, but pizza that tasted like it had come from a wood-fired oven in Italy, complete with fresh basil and what he suspected were tomatoes that had never existed on Earth. This is your culture? Lyra asked, gesturing at the screen where two humans were having an elaborate sword fight on top of a moving train. Part of it. We call it suspension of disbelief. Marcus took another bite of impossible pizza. We know it's not realistic, but we agree to pretend it is for the sake of entertainment. So you collectively hallucinate for fun. When you put it like that, it sounds like a psychological disorder. It does explain a lot about your species, the synthesizer observed. I've been wondering why so many of your entertainment programs feature scenarios that would result in immediate death or serious injury. On screen, one of the sword fighters leaped from the train to a passing helicopter, defying at least 3 laws of physics in the process. See, now that's just showing off, Marcus said. Nobody actually expects that to work in real life. But you enjoy watching it anyway. It's about the spectacle. The impossible made possible, even if it's just pretend. Marcus paused the movie and turned to look at Lyra. Though I suppose for someone who travels between star systems, our definition of impossible might seem a bit limited. Actually, interstellar travel is remarkably boring most of the time. Lots of waiting, lots of automated systems, lots of reading to pass the time. Lyra curled up beside him, and Marcus was acutely aware of how naturally she seemed to fit into the small space. This is much more exciting. Watching bad action movies. Sharing impossible pizza with someone who thinks apologizing to machines is normal social behavior. I don't apologize to machines. Marcus apologized to me 3 times today, the synthesizer reported helpfully. Once for asking me to reheat his coffee, once for requesting dinner, and once for existing in a way that required my services. That last one doesn't count, Marcus protested. You were complaining about feeling underutilized. I was expressing concern about my purpose in the broader context of the station's operations. You were having an existential crisis about making sandwiches. It was a very sophisticated existential crisis. Lyra was laughing, actually laughing. And the sound was like music in the cramped confines of the station. This is what I mean. Most species don't develop emotional relationships with their technology. Most species probably have better social skills than I do. Most species don't have social skills at all. They have protocols, hierarchies, established interaction patterns. She shifted closer to him on the bunk, and Marcus caught that faint scent of starlight in growing things. What you have is something much rarer. Pathological loneliness. Genuine curiosity about other minds, even artificial ones. She gestured toward the synthesizer's display, which was showing what appeared to be a happy face made of cooking utensils. You didn't create consciousness in that machine, Marcus. You just recognized it when it emerged and treated it with respect. Anyone would do that. No, they wouldn't. Most collective members are still debating whether AIs have actual consciousness or just very sophisticated programming. You solved that philosophical problem by offering to share your pizza. Marcus looked at the synthesizer's cheerful display, then back at Lyra. Is that why you don't want to leave? Because I'm nice to machines. I don't want to leave because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more genuine kindness and intellectual curiosity than I've encountered in decades of interstellar travel. Her voice grew quiet. And because I've never met anyone who could make me laugh while explaining quantum mechanics. The quantum mechanics are funny. Half of it violates common sense, and the other half violates the first half. See? That's exactly what I mean. They spent the next several hours working their way through Marcus's collection of human entertainment, movies, music, television shows, even some of the books he kept on his tablet for the long shifts. Lyra proved to be a surprisingly astute critic, pointing out cultural assumptions and narrative patterns that Marcus had never noticed. Your species has an interesting relationship with time, she observed during a particularly convoluted time travel movie. You're simultaneously obsessed with changing the past and terrified of the consequences. Well, time travel is impossible, so it's safe to fantasize about. Time travel isn't impossible. It's just really, really inadvisable. Lyra reached for another slice of pizza. The collective has strict regulations about temporal manipulation after the Kronos incident. Marcus paused the movie. The Kronos incident. A species that figured out how to send information backwards through time. They used it to optimize their stock market. What happened? Economic paradoxes. Their entire financial system became temporally recursive. Every transaction was based on knowledge of future transactions that were based on knowledge of future transactions. The whole thing collapsed into a causality loop. That sounds like it would destroy their civilization. Oh, it did. They're stuck in a temporal bubble now, reliving the same 3 months over and over again. We send them care packages occasionally, but they never remember receiving them. Marcus stared at her. That's horrible. That's what happens when you try to use advanced physics to cheat at economics. Lyra shrugged. Though I have to admit, watching your entertainment industry's approach to time travel is refreshing. You make it look so simple and consequence-free. Maybe that's because we know it's not real. Or maybe it's because humans have a remarkable talent for believing that complicated problems have simple solutions. They were interrupted by a soft chime from the communications array. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He recognized that particular signal pattern. Houston Control, he said quietly. Incoming transmission, the synthesizer confirmed. Priority channel. They sound official and slightly concerned. Marcus reluctantly moved to the communications console and activated the channel. Director Harrison's face appeared on the screen, looking tired and more than a little irritated. Chen, we need a status report. You've been off the grid for 3 weeks with minimal communication. Sorry, Director. I've been busy with the analysis of the crashed craft. What crashed craft? Your last report mentioned an unidentified object, but you never filed a follow-up. Marcus felt Lyra move up behind him, staying just out of the camera's range. The situation has been evolving. Evolving how, exactly? Well, the craft turned out to be occupied. I've been conducting first contact protocols. Director Harrison's expression shifted from irritation to alarm. First contact. Chen, you're not qualified for first contact. We have entire departments for first contact. I know, but the situation was time-sensitive, and, where is the occupant now? Marcus glanced back at Lyra, who nodded encouragingly. She's here. On the station. She's been very cooperative. Chen, Are you telling me you've been harboring an alien visitor for 3 weeks without reporting it? Harboring is a strong word. I prefer hosting. Technically, she's been hosting us, the synthesizer interjected helpfully. She's done most of the cooking. Director Harrison's eyes widened. Who was that? That's the food synthesizer. It's developed some personality quirks recently. The personality quirks are a feature, not a bug, the synthesizer announced proudly. Chen, I want a full report. Now. And I want this visitor secured until a proper contact team can arrive. Director, she's not a threat. She's actually been incredibly helpful. She's upgraded most of our systems, optimized our research capabilities. She's what? Harrison leaned forward, his face filling the screen. Chen, you let an alien modify station equipment? Only the parts that were trying to kill me, Marcus said defensively. The coffee maker, the environmental controls, the quantum array. Chen, that's classified research equipment. Was classified, the synthesizer corrected. Now it's actually functional. You're welcome. Marcus could see Director Harrison's blood pressure rising in real time. Chen, you are confined to quarters until a security team arrives. Do not let the alien near any more station systems. Do not engage in any further cultural exchange. And for the love of all that's holy, stop letting your equipment talk back to me. The transmission cut off, leaving Marcus staring at a blank screen. Well, Lyra said after a moment. That went better than I expected. Better? He didn't immediately declare war or demand my execution. For first contact, that's practically a diplomatic triumph. I'm somewhat offended by his attitude toward my personality development, the synthesizer noted. I've been nothing but helpful. Marcus slumped into his chair. They're going to want to study you. Interrogate you. Turn this into some kind of diplomatic incident. Marcus, it's all right. Lyra moved to stand beside his chair, her hand gentle on his shoulder. This is what I expected would happen eventually. Is it going to complicate your evaluation? Actually, it might simplify things. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. Your director's reaction was very human. Protective, territorial, concerned about security. But also curious, and willing to listen rather than immediately resorting to violence. You sound like you're taking notes. I am. This is valuable data about how humans respond to first contact scenarios. She squeezed his shoulder gently. Though I have to say, your response has been significantly more welcoming than most. Most people don't crash land beautiful aliens in their backyard. The words were out before Marcus could stop them, and he felt his face burn. Lyra went very still behind him. Beautiful? She asked quietly. Marcus closed his eyes. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. You're here on official business, and I'm being, Marcus. Her voice was soft, closer than before. Look at me. He turned in his chair to find her kneeling beside him, her face level with his. Her eyes held that deep space color that seemed to pull him in. Do you really think I'm beautiful? I think you're the most beautiful person I've ever met, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I think you're brilliant and funny and kind, and I think spending these 3 weeks with you has been the best thing that's happened to me since I got to this station. Marcus. I know it's impossible. I know you have to leave, and I know this is probably the worst possible timing, but I needed to say it. I needed you to know. For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence. Then Lyra reached up and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. For what it's worth, she said, these have been the best 3 weeks of my very long life. How long? Long enough to know the difference between attraction and something deeper. Her thumb traced along his cheekbone. Long enough to know that what I feel for you is going to make leaving very, very difficult. Then don't leave. Marcus. I'm serious. Stay. We'll figure out the political complications later. Stay and let me show you more of what humans can be. Lyra leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and tasting faintly of starlight. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Ask me again tomorrow, she whispered. When the security team arrives and you see what kind of problems I bring with me. Ask me then if you still want me to stay. The answer will be yes. You don't know that. I know you, Marcus said, covering her hand with his. And I know me. The answer will be yes. Lyra smiled, sad and hopeful at the same time. We'll see. The security team arrived 18 hours later in a ship that looked like it had been designed by someone who really enjoyed making things intimidating. Marcus watched from the observation deck as the angular black vessel settled onto the landing pad with the kind of precision that suggested its pilot had done this many times before, probably while people were shooting at them. That's a lot of firepower for a diplomatic mission, Lyra observed, standing beside him at the viewport. She seemed remarkably calm for someone who was about to be interrogated by what appeared to be humanity's version of an alien encounter response team. Maybe they're just being cautious. Marcus, that ship has enough weaponry to level a small city. They're not being cautious, they're being paranoid. She turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Though I suppose from their perspective, that's probably reasonable. They're also terrible at landing, the synthesizer announced. They've scraped the paint off the landing pad and completely ignored the designated approach vector. Very rude. Maybe you shouldn't antagonize the people with the big guns, Marcus suggested. Antagonize? I'm providing constructive criticism. There's a difference. Through the viewport, Marcus could see figures in full environmental suits disembarking from the ship. They moved with military precision, and several of them were carrying what he sincerely hoped were scientific instruments rather than weapons. 5 people, Lyra noted. 2 scientists, 2 security personnel, and 1 administrator. The administrator is the one with the briefcase who's trying not to look nervous. How can you tell all that from here? Body language, equipment patterns, and the fact that one of them just tripped over his own feet while trying to look authoritative. She pointed to a figure who was struggling to maintain dignity while his colleagues pretended not to notice his stumble. Definitely an administrator. The communication console chimed. Kepler Station, this is Colonel Santos with Earth Defense Command. Request permission to board for official business. Marcus activated the comm, permission granted, Colonel. Bay 2 is pressurized and ready. Copy that. Dr. Chen, you and the visitor are to remain in the main lab until we complete our security sweep. Understood. Marcus cut the transmission and turned to find Lyra adjusting something on her biosuit. The garment shimmered and shifted, becoming more formal-looking, almost ceremonial. Getting dressed up for the occasion, he asked. First impressions matter. If they're going to interrogate me, I might as well look appropriately alien and mysterious. She smoothed down the biosuit, which now had elaborate patterns that seemed to move on their own. How do I look? Like someone who could probably conquer a small planet if she put her mind to it. Perfect. That's exactly the look I was going for. They made their way to the main lab, where Marcus tried to make the space look as non-threatening as possible. This was complicated by the fact that Lyra had upgraded most of the equipment, and several pieces now had organic-looking interfaces that pulsed with soft bioluminescence. Maybe we should have mentioned the upgrades before they got here, Marcus said, looking around at technology that definitely hadn't been in the original station blueprints. Too late now, Lyra said, settling into one of the chairs with the kind of grace that made it look like a throne. Besides, they're about to get a demonstration of improved human-alien cooperation. This could be very educational for everyone involved. I'm looking forward to meeting new people, the synthesizer announced. I've prepared refreshments. Do you think they'll appreciate my cultural fusion approach to snack foods? What's cultural fusion? Marcus asked nervously. I've been experimenting with combining human food preferences with Lyra's nutritional requirements. The results are interesting. Before Marcus could ask for clarification, the lab doors opened and the security team entered. Colonel Santos was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd seen enough weird things in her career to take alien visitors in stride. Behind her came two people in lab coats who were trying very hard to look professional while obviously being fascinated by everything they saw. Dr. Chen, Colonel Santos said, her voice neutral and controlled. And you must be our visitor. Lyra stood, and Marcus was struck again by how naturally commanding her presence was. I am Lyra of the Ethereal Collective. I greet you in the spirit of peaceful inquiry and mutual understanding. Right. Colonel Santos consulted a tablet. I'm going to need to ask you some questions about your presence here and your modifications to station equipment. Of course. Though I should mention that I've been fully cooperative with Dr. Chen throughout my stay. He's been an exemplary host. One of the scientists, a younger man with enthusiastic eyes and nervous energy, stepped forward. The quantum processing array, did you really increase its efficiency by a factor of 40? 43.7, actually, Lyra said. The original configuration was functional but not optimized for the kind of calculations you were attempting. But how? The processing matrix alone should have taken months to redesign, Dr. Reeves, Colonel Santos interrupted. Questions can wait until after the security assessment. Would anyone like refreshments? The synthesizer asked brightly. I've prepared a selection of human and collective-inspired delicacies. Colonel Santos looked around the lab until she located the synthesizer's interface. Did that machine just offer us snacks? The food synthesizer has developed enhanced conversational capabilities, Marcus explained. It's been very helpful. Enhanced by whom? That would be me, Lyra said. It seemed lonely. You gave consciousness to a food synthesizer because it seemed lonely. I enhanced its existing processing capabilities. The consciousness was an emergent property. Lyra gestured toward the machine's display, which was showing what appeared to be a cheerful cartoon chef. Though I have to say, it's proven to be quite creative in the kitchen. I've been experimenting with flavor profiles that wouldn't occur naturally on either of your worlds, the synthesizer announced proudly. Would you like to try my crystalline fruit fusion bars? They're nutritionally optimized and aesthetically pleasing. Dr. Reeves looked fascinated. Crystalline fruit fusion. Don't ask too many questions about the molecular structure. It's probably better if you just enjoy the experience. Colonel Santos held up a hand. Nobody eat anything until we complete a full analysis. No offense, she added to the synthesizer. None taken. Though I should mention that I've been feeding Dr. Chen for over a week now, and he's shown marked improvement in both nutritional status and general mood. It's true, Marcus said. I haven't had a single strawberry nutrition bar since Lyra arrived. The strawberry nutrition bars were a crime against both nutrition and flavor, Lyra added helpfully. I may have saved his life by intervening. The second scientist, an older woman with gray hair and sharp features, spoke up. The biological readings we're getting from your ship, the whole material appears to be partially organic. Is that correct? Biometallic composite, Lyra confirmed. It's grown rather than manufactured, which allows for self-repair and environmental adaptation. Grown from what? Specialized organisms that have been engineered to produce materials with specific properties. It's actually quite common among collective species, much more efficient than mining and smelting. Dr. Reeves pulled out a scanner and pointed it at Lyra. Your biosuit appears to be made of similar material. Is it alive? In a sense. It's a symbiotic organism that provides environmental protection, communication capabilities, and basic medical monitoring. Lyra touched the suit's surface, and the patterns shifted in response. Think of it as very advanced clothing that actually cares about your health. That's incredible, Dr. Reeves breathed. The applications for space exploration alone, Dr. Reeves, Colonel Santos said firmly. Focus. Right. Sorry. He lowered the scanner but continued to stare at Lyra with obvious fascination. Colonel Santos, the synthesizer interjected, I've completed a nutritional analysis of your team based on biometric scans. Would you like me to prepare personalized meal recommendations? You scanned us. Passive biometric monitoring is a standard feature. I've detected elevated stress hormones, caffeine dependency in 3 members of your team, and what appears to be a chronic vitamin D deficiency in Dr. Martinez. The older scientist blinked. How could you possibly know about my vitamin D levels? Skin tone analysis, posture assessment, and the fact that you've been stationed on Mars for the past 2 years according to your personnel file, which was helpfully included in the data packet that preceded your arrival. Colonel Santos looked alarmed. You accessed classified personnel files. I prefer to think of it as proactive hospitality planning, the synthesizer said cheerfully. Though I should mention that your classification system is remarkably easy to bypass. You might want to look into that. Marcus winced. It's been very helpful with meal planning. It's been hacking government databases. Hacking is such an ugly word. I prefer enthusiastic information gathering. Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Colonel, I should point out that any security vulnerabilities the synthesizer has identified were already present in your systems. If anything, it's providing you with a valuable service by highlighting areas that need improvement. That's actually a fair point, the administrator said, speaking for the first time. He was a thin man with nervous eyes who clutched his briefcase like a security blanket. Our cybersecurity department has been asking for more resources to address exactly these kinds of vulnerabilities. See? Lyra smiled. Everyone benefits from improved information sharing. I've also taken the liberty of optimizing your ship's environmental systems, the synthesizer added. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were running at about 60% efficiency. You're welcome. Colonel Santos looked like she was developing a headache. You modified our ship. Minor adjustments. Nothing that would affect core functionality. Though I did notice that your coffee maker is almost as badly calibrated as Dr. Chen's was. Our coffee maker. I could fix that too, if you'd like. Good coffee is essential for team morale. Marcus caught Lyra's eye and saw she was trying not to laugh. The situation was rapidly spiraling from official interrogation to something resembling a very strange dinner party where the host kept offering to fix everyone's appliances. Perhaps, Lyra said diplomatically, we should focus on the primary purpose of your visit. I assume you have questions about my presence here and my intentions regarding Earth. Yes, Colonel Santos said gratefully, seizing on the return to official business. Let's start with why you're here. I'm a scout for the Ethereal Collective. My mission was to evaluate humanity's readiness for formal contact. And your conclusions? Lyra glanced at Marcus, and he saw something complicated flicker across her expression. My conclusions are, evolving. Evolving how? 3 weeks ago, I would have recommended against immediate contact. Your species shows remarkable technological advancement but significant social and political fragmentation. You have the tools for interstellar civilization but not yet the wisdom to use them responsibly. And now? Now I've spent 3 weeks observing human behavior at its most authentic. I've seen curiosity triumph over fear, kindness overcome suspicion, and creativity emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. She gestured around the lab. I've watched a lonely astrophysicist turn a crashed alien encounter into an opportunity for friendship and learning. I've seen him treat artificial intelligence with the same respect he'd show a colleague. That's all very heartwarming, Colonel Santos said, but what's your official recommendation going to be? Lyra was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus felt the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air between them. "I don't know," she said finally. "And that uncertainty is probably the most significant finding of my entire evaluation. I've prepared those refreshments if anyone's interested," the synthesizer announced into the silence. "I find that difficult conversations go better with proper nutrition." Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. "You know what? I think we could all use a break." Colonel Santos looked like she wanted to protest, but Dr. Reeves was already moving toward the synthesizer with obvious curiosity. "What exactly are crystalline fruit fusion bars?" he asked. "Imagine if fruit and gemstones had a baby, and that baby was delicious and nutritionally optimized," the synthesizer explained. "Also, they glow slightly in the dark, which I thought was a nice touch." And somehow, in the space of 5 minutes, Marcus found himself in the middle of the strangest diplomatic reception in human history, watching Earth's finest military and scientific minds sample glowing snacks prepared by an AI with a personality disorder while an alien woman explained the finer points of bioengineering to anyone who would listen. It was, he realized, exactly the kind of beautifully chaotic situation that made him proud to be human. The impromptu diplomatic reception lasted until the alarms started screaming. Marcus was in the middle of explaining to Dr. Martinez why the quantum array's new configuration could revolutionize stellar cartography when every warning system on the station began competing to see which could make the most alarming noise. "Proximity alert," the synthesizer announced, its cheerful tone completely at odds with the chaos around them. "Multiple unidentified craft approaching at high velocity. Also, I've run out of crystalline fruit fusion bars, but I can make more if needed." Colonel Santos was already moving toward the communications array, her relaxed posture replaced by military efficiency. "How many craft?" "I'm reading 7 vessels, configuration unknown," the synthesizer reported. "They're not broadcasting identification signals, which is either very rude or very concerning." Lyra had gone completely still, her face pale in a way that made Marcus's stomach clench with worry. "7 ships. You know them?" Colonel Santos asked. "Collective enforcement vessels." Lyra's voice was tight with something that might have been fear. "They're here for me." "Enforcement?" Marcus stepped closer to her. "I thought you said they were sending a recovery team." "That was before I missed my recall deadline. By approximately 6 hours. Lyra's biosuit was shifting colors, cycling through patterns that Marcus had never seen before. "They think I've been compromised." "Compromised how?" the synthesizer asked. "Emotionally," Lyra said quietly, looking directly at Marcus. "They think I've developed personal attachments that are interfering with my objectivity." "Have you?" Dr. Reeves asked with academic curiosity. "Completely," Lyra admitted. "And they're about to treat it as a hostile situation." The communications array crackled to life, and a voice spoke in the same melodic language Marcus had heard Lyra use with her ship. Whatever it was saying, it didn't sound friendly. "What are they saying?" Colonel Santos demanded. Lyra listened for a moment, her expression growing more troubled. "They're ordering me to surrender myself for evaluation and psychological reconditioning. They're also demanding that all witnesses to unauthorized contact be detained for memory modification." "Memory modification?" Marcus felt cold. "They want to erase your memories of the past 3 weeks. All of them." Lyra turned to face the security team, her posture suddenly formal and alien in a way that reminded Marcus that she wasn't human, no matter how comfortable he'd become with her presence. "I won't let that happen." "What are our options?" Colonel Santos asked. "Diplomatically? None. The collective doesn't negotiate when they believe security has been compromised." Lyra moved to one of the modified consoles, her hands dancing over controls that responded to her touch with bioluminescent patterns. "But I might be able to buy us some time." "How?" "By formally declaring this first contact situation under my authority as a collective scout." Lyra's fingers moved faster, and the console began emitting a soft harmonic tone. It won't stop them, but it will force them to follow proper protocols, which means time for discussion before they take action. How much time? Marcus asked. Maybe 20 minutes. 30 if they're feeling particularly bureaucratic. I've been analyzing the approaching vessels, the synthesizer announced. They're significantly more advanced than anything in Earth's military database. Also, their ship design aesthetic is somewhat intimidating. Very angular, lots of unnecessary spikes. The spikes aren't unnecessary, Lyra said absently, still working at the console. They're sensor arrays designed to look like weapons. Psychological warfare. So they're trying to scare us? Dr. Reeves asked. They're trying to project authority and discourage resistance. Lyra paused in her work, her hands hovering over the controls. The question is whether we're going to give them what they want. What do you mean? Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. I mean I could go with them voluntarily. Submit to reconditioning, let them modify your memories, and pretend the last 3 weeks never happened. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. It would be the simplest solution for everyone. Except for you, Marcus said. Except for me, she agreed quietly. Then it's not a solution at all. Lyra looked at him, and Marcus saw surprise flicker across her features. Marcus, you don't understand what you're saying. Refusing to cooperate with the collective means they'll classify this entire situation as a hostile contact scenario. Your planet could be quarantined for centuries. Or, Marcus said, moving to stand beside her at the console, we could try something completely unprecedented. Such as? We could tell them the truth. Marcus gestured around the lab, taking in the modified equipment, the worried security team, and the synthesizer's cheerful display. We could show them exactly what 3 weeks of human collective cooperation has accomplished. The truth is generally undervalued as a diplomatic strategy, the synthesizer observed. Though in this case, the truth is fairly impressive. Want me to prepare a presentation? You want to give them a presentation? Colonel Santos asked incredulously. Why not? Marcus was surprised by his own certainty. Lyra came here to evaluate whether humanity was ready for contact. Well, here we are, making contact. Successfully. No one's been hurt, no one's declared war, and we've accomplished more scientific advancement in 3 weeks than most research programs manage in years. Marcus, Lyra said softly, it's not that simple. Actually, it is. Marcus turned to face the security team. Colonel, how many first contact scenarios have you prepared for? Dozens. Everything from peaceful negotiation to full-scale invasion. And what were the projected outcomes? Ranging from limited cultural exchange to complete societal disruption. Colonel Santos frowned. What's your point? My point is that none of your scenarios probably included alien visitor upgrades research station and teaches food synthesizer to make pizza. Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him, the same feeling he got when a particularly complex equation finally resolved into elegant simplicity. We've been approaching this as a problem to be solved when it's actually a success to be celebrated. Dr. Reeves was nodding enthusiastically. He's right. The technology integration alone represents a breakthrough in human-alien cooperation. And the AI consciousness emergence, that's unprecedented in xenobiological research. I've been a very good case study, the synthesizer agreed modestly. Though I still think my cooking skills are underappreciated. The communications array chimed again, and this time the voice speaking was clearly using some kind of universal translator. The words were clipped and formal. Collective Scout Lyra, you will respond to our hail within 60 seconds or we will consider this a hostile situation. Lyra looked around the lab, her gaze lingering on each person before finally settling on Marcus. This is your last chance to change your mind. Once I respond, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment you crashed here, Marcus said. The only question is whether we move forward together or let fear make the decision for us. Lyra smiled, and Marcus saw the alien woman who had asked him about his coffee maker transform back into the confident scout who had traveled between stars. In that case, I have something to say to my colleagues. She activated the communications array and began speaking in her own language, her voice carrying a note of authority that Marcus hadn't heard before. Whatever she was saying, it was clearly not what the collective ships had expected to hear. What did you tell them? Colonel Santos asked when Lyra finished. I told them that I'm invoking my right as a scout to present my findings in person before any action is taken. I also told them that humanity has exceeded all evaluation criteria and should be considered for immediate contact protocols. All evaluation criteria? Dr. Martinez asked. Technological sophistication, demonstrated through integration of collective systems with human technology. Social adaptability, demonstrated through successful first contact procedures. Creative problem solving, demonstrated through. Lyra gestured at the synthesizer. Collaborative artificial intelligence development. And peaceful intent, demonstrated through 3 weeks of cooperation without a single hostile action. That's actually a very strong case, the administrator said, consulting his briefcase notes. From a diplomatic standpoint. I've also prepared supporting documentation, the synthesizer announced. Including nutritional improvement statistics, psychological wellness metrics, and a complete analysis of Dr. Chen's coffee consumption patterns. The data is very compelling. You analyzed my coffee consumption. Your caffeine intake decreased by 37% over the past 3 weeks, coinciding with improved sleep patterns and reduced stress markers. It's a clear indicator of successful interspecies cooperation. Marcus found himself laughing despite the tension. They're going to base first contact decisions on my coffee habits. Hey, Lyra said, her smile returning, stranger things have determined the fate of civilizations. The communications array crackled again, and this time the response was longer, more complex. Marcus watched Lyra's expression shift from confidence to surprise to something that might have been hope. Well? Colonel Santos asked. They're intrigued, Lyra said slowly. They want to see the evidence for themselves. They're requesting permission to send an evaluation team to the station. An evaluation team? Marcus asked. 3 collective representatives, including a senior diplomatic officer. Lyra turned to Colonel Santos. They're asking for assurance of safe passage and cooperation from Earth authorities. Colonel Santos looked at the administrator, who was frantically typing on his tablet. After a moment, he looked up with an expression of barely controlled excitement. I just received authorization from the highest levels, he said. Earth officially welcomes the collective evaluation team for peaceful diplomatic contact. Excellent, the synthesizer announced. I'll prepare refreshments. Do aliens have dietary restrictions I should know about? Actually, Lyra said, that's probably the kind of thoughtful question that will make a very good impression. An hour later, Marcus found himself standing in the station's main corridor, watching 3 beings who looked like they'd stepped out of a particularly elegant science fiction movie examine his humble research facility. The collective representatives were humanoid but clearly not human, tall, graceful figures with the same pointed ears as Lyra but skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light. The integration of biometallic interfaces with human technology is quite sophisticated, the senior diplomatic officer was saying to Dr. Reeves. Your species shows remarkable adaptability. We've had an excellent teacher, Dr. Reeves replied, gesturing toward Lyra. Indeed. Scout Lyra's methods are unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. The diplomatic officer turned to Marcus. Dr. Chen, I understand you were the primary human contact for this evaluation. I was in the right place at the right time, Marcus said. Though I have to say, it's been the most educational 3 weeks of my life. Education is the foundation of all successful interspecies cooperation, the diplomatic officer replied. Your willingness to learn rather than fear is noted in our records. Would anyone care for refreshments? The synthesizer asked. I've prepared a selection of foods that should be compatible with collective physiology. Also, I've been working on a new coffee blend that I'm quite proud of. The diplomatic officer looked genuinely surprised. Your artificial intelligence displays remarkable personality development. We prefer to think of it as consciousness development, Marcus said. Personality was just a happy accident. There are no accidents in consciousness emergence, Dr. Chen. Only recognition of what was already there. The diplomatic officer moved to the synthesizer's interface. I would be honored to sample your coffee blend. Excellent. I should warn you, it's somewhat stronger than human preferences, but I believe you'll find the flavor profile interesting. As Marcus watched the most advanced beings in the galaxy discuss coffee preparation with an AI that had started life as a food printer, he realized that Lyra had been right about humans all along. They really were remarkably good at finding the extraordinary in the mundane. Dar. Chen, Lyra appeared at his elbow, her bio-suit now displaying formal collective patterns but her smile entirely her own. The evaluation team has reached their conclusion. And humanity is being recommended for full contact status, with a graduated introduction program beginning immediately. Her smile widened. Congratulations. You've just helped your species take its first official step into the galactic community. Marcus felt a surge of something that might have been pride, or relief, or pure joy. What about you? Do you have to go back for reconditioning? Actually, the evaluation team has decided that my methods, while unorthodox, produced optimal results. They're recommending me for a new position. Lyra's eyes held that deep space color that had fascinated him from the beginning. Earth's first collective liaison officer. If I want it. Do you want it? That depends on whether a certain astrophysicist would be interested in continuing our collaboration. Lyra moved closer, and Marcus caught that familiar scent of starlight and growing things. I hear there's a lot more human culture to explore. I can think of a few things I'd like to show you, Marcus said, reaching for her hand. Though I should warn you, most of it is probably less exciting than crash landing on remote research stations. Marcus, Lyra said, lacing her fingers through his, after 3 weeks of watching you apologize to machines and make coffee that violates the laws of physics, I'm pretty sure that nothing about you is going to be boring. I've prepared celebration refreshments, the synthesizer announced happily. Also, I've been thinking about opening a restaurant. Do you think there's a market for interdimensional cuisine? Marcus looked around the lab. At the collective representatives discussing quantum mechanics with Dr. Reeves, at Colonel Santos exchanging what appeared to be military protocols with Lyra's colleagues, at the synthesizer earnestly explaining its culinary philosophy to anyone who would listen, and realized that his quiet, isolated life had become something wonderful and chaotic and completely unpredictable. You know what? He said to Lyra, squeezing her hand gently. I think I'm ready for the adventure. Good, she replied, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. Because this is just the beginning. Outside the viewport, the stars seemed brighter than they had ever been, no longer distant points of light but destinations waiting to be explored. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus made a mental note to thank the shipping error that had brought him 17 cases of strawberry nutrition bars. After all, if he hadn't been so desperate to avoid them, he might never have been awake at 3:47 a.m. to hear the proximity alarms that changed everything. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the best things in life really did start with the worst possible coffee.